he deliberately misled Parliament. I think what they were trying to do was to show that he'd been reckless. He hadn't treated this seriously enough. He hadn't got the right advice. And his attempts to say that he had got the right advice, essentially from two comms people in Number 10, not that they're not important people, it just sounded like a pretty thin defence, really.
MPs have overwhelmingly backed part of Rishi Sunak's latest Brexit deal. 22 Conservative backbenchers were among those who voted against the so-called Stormont break. RMT rail strikes planned for next Thursday and Saturday have been put on hold after discussions with train operators about pay. Network Rail workers accepted a wage rise earlier in the week. A surprise leap in inflation has been driven by the shortages of tomatoes and cucumbers. Figures show the cost of living grew faster last month than in January. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 30 points at 75.66. The pound buys $1.22 and €1.13. LBC weather, heavy showers spreading northeastwards with a low of 2. Blustery showers tomorrow, longer spells of rain in the southeast with a high of 15 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel with me tonight are Jim McMahon to my left, Shadow Environment Secretary, Labour MP for Oldham West and Royton. Sitting next to him is Bob Seeley, Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight. And we have two debutants on the programme tonight. To my right, Resham Kotecha, Commissioner for the Social Mobility Commission and a trustee of the Women's Rights Campaign Group, the Forset Society. And next to her, Iain Thompson, who's a satirist and podcaster. His podcast is called, it's got a slightly strange title in some ways, Iain Thompson and Other Disappointments. We don't want you to be a disappointment tonight, Aid, but we'll make that judgment at the end of the programme, shall we?
Sure.
The number to call, 0345 6060 973, if you'd like to put a question to our panel. You can send a text to 84850. You can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
We do like to surprise you sometimes with our first question, but I don't think this is going to be a great surprise to anyone today. Scott's in West Hampstead. Hello, Scott.
Good evening, Iain, and good evening, panel. My question is this. After his fighting performance at today's Commons Privileges Committee, is Boris Johnson, the great Houdini of British politics, more or less likely to make a political comeback?
That's such a good question. Andrew Marr said earlier that he thought this buried Boris Johnson's political career. Jim McMahon, let's start with you.
I think probably less Houdini and more the Wizard of Oz. When you pull back the curtain, it's not very impressive, is it? Listen, I have respect for Parliament. I think it's a privilege to serve as an MP. And I think that privilege should be carried with responsibility to be honest and act with integrity. And I think Boris Johnson has played fast and loose on that front. And frankly, watching the scenes today was embarrassing.
Why was it embarrassing?
Because I don't feel like he's taken responsibility for what happened during that time. And for me, we can't view through the perspective of today. We're all enjoying our freedoms today. We're all seeing the loved ones today. We're all enjoying our social lives today. That wasn't the case during lockdown. You know, people were making real sacrifices at the time that those parties were taking place.
I do not wish to be accused of being a mouthpiece for Boris Johnson, but people seem to think I am sometimes. He would say, well, the part of the reason that we're enjoying our freedoms today is because of the measures that he took. And yes, he has admitted that he made mistakes. He's apologised for some of the mistakes that he made in terms of what the allegations are today. But the central question is whether that committee is going to find that he deliberately misled MPs by lying to the House of Commons. Now, do you believe I know you heard all of the hearing today because you don't have a life. Do you feel, on the basis of what you heard today, that things are any clearer than they were this morning?
Well, Boris Johnson didn't go into that room with the intention of making it clearer. His whole strategy is to cause confusion, to cause chaos, and to confuse the conversation even more. Now, he was given the opportunity by the chair of the committee to correct the record if he had misled it inadvertently, and he chose not to. And so, listen, let's not prejudge it. We've all seen the evidence, and I think we all have views, but it's important the committee reviews all the evidence in a fair way. And Boris Johnson will have to account for himself, but ultimately he has to accept that at that time, when he was asking people to stay at home, to protect lives, to save the NHS, that was about defeating the virus and saving the country for what could have been an even worse loss of life. For him to party, for that culture to exist in Downing Street, that was at odds with what the country was being asked to do and the lived experience of millions of people who were making sacrifices in Britain.
Bob Seeley.
I'm incredibly proud to say I didn't watch a single second of the testimony today.
Why are you proud?
Because I've got better things to do. I have a life, and my life is working damn hard for the good people of the Isle of Wight and delivering a better deal for them. And I didn't have 3 hours spare to watch telly. And I actually have to say I slightly despair of the media's obsession with Boris. Look, he's a super entertaining figure. I like the guy. I think he's a very warm person. And I think history will judge him probably a little bit more generously than we are now. But actually, this is all about the past. I don't get the media obsession with Boris Johnson.
Well, hang on a minute. You can't possibly say that we shouldn't be covering...
No, you cover away.
Well, when an ex-Prime Minister appears before the Privileges Committee, are you seriously saying that that's a media obsession?
I think there's a media obsession with Boris Johnson. There is rightly an interest in what he said today.
He was Prime Minister.
Yeah, but he's not anymore, Jim. That's sort of
No, but he was, and the inquiry, of course, will look backwards. You don't have an inquiry that looks forwards. It can't pretend the future that hasn't yet taken place. It's going to look at his actions during the pandemic.
If you want to spend 3 hours watching an ex-Prime Minister justify having a party because we had ridiculous lockdown rules... Look, there's a really serious... Jim, let me finish, you finish. I listened to you carefully, you said some good stuff. There is a really serious debate here. It's about whether locking down a society was healthy. There's a really serious debate about actually whether we killed more people than we saved, about whether we lost far more quality of life years than we saved, whether the 400 billion, which is now feeding massively into the inflation and the cost of living crisis now, was well spent. Yet there are really big issues. There's a big issue about whether the BBC did its job as a national broadcaster by effectively not even questioning whether these decisions were being made. There's a massive issue about if COVID came from a lab, what are we doing to tighten up security in labs throughout the world?
There's also a big issue as to whether the former Prime Minister of this country deliberately lied to the House of Commons. So please don't seek to minimise that.
No, I'm not. But let's separate that. There is an important issue about a really senior politician like Boris giving testimony. You're right. Is it the best use of my time to listen to it? No. Why? Because actually, is it going to butter any parsnips on the Isle of Wight? It ain't. I'm interested in delivering for my folks, and frankly, I've better use of 3 hours of my time.
You did that very well at PMQs today, if I may say so, which you might mention a little bit later on if you get the chance, I'm sure. Aidan Thompson.
Well, there's a lot of talk about, what did we learn from this committee hearing today? For me, it was a very valuable experience sitting through it. It was long. It was about 2 hours in when I first felt like, okay, this is worth my time. Like that was when they finally asked the question that's been going around my mind for the last year, basically since he was ejected from power and since these questions of Partygate first emerged. It was around sort of, okay, I'm at the dispatch box, I'm telling everyone that I've been given assurances that all guidelines were followed. Until today, I'd never heard anyone ask him directly, or I certainly never heard a clear-cut answer, who had given him those assurances. And so about 2 hours into this hearing today, I was like, oh, finally, bullseye. Right, okay, let's hear the answer. And the answer that he gave to that, I thought was really revealing. It was like, they said, okay, well, who gave you the assurances that armed you to go to the dispatch box? And he said, along the lines of, I can't tell you. He said, I've promised these people I won't put their names out into the public arena.
And then he did.
And then ultimately he did, yeah. I was reading through Twitter on the way here and it seemed like that was sort of accidental. I don't know if he was sort of flapping and trying to gain control of the conversation again. But yeah, I don't know. It just sort of seemed to me like somebody who was backed into a corner, who was giving this childlike, naughty schoolboy response of like, look, did you break the vase? Did you break? No, I didn't. Oh, well, who did then? Not telling. It's like, this is the level of political discourse that we're now at in this country. And it was, for me, like as someone who sits firmly, comfortably on the left, it was a really enjoyable day.
Do you not find it a little bit trivial, though? I mean, look, we've got a charismatic leader who has an on-off relationship with the truth. In Boris's case, it was a guy who couldn't decide whether the parties he was at were either fun or legal. Well, legal, I don't know if they were fun. With Tony Blair, you had it about taking a country to a war.
Oh, come on.
Now, I know what's serious and I know what's trivial.
A global pandemic is quite serious.
Tony Blair was a serious issue. Boris lying about parties? He wasn't covering up the virus. He wasn't doing a Chinese number on let's deny everything about the virus, let's hide the evidence. The issue was about whether he was in a room with too many people and some alcohol. Sorry, that's not doing it for me.
Respectfully disagree. I think it is hugely important, whoever the Prime Minister or recent Prime Minister is of the day, if they've lied to the country at the dispatch box, whether it's a Tony Blair or a Liz Truss or a Rishi Sunak, I want to know not just whether they've lied. I'm pretty sure we all know the answer to that one. I want to know that there are repercussions and that we live in a country where there are.
But Aidan, there are repercussions. He lost his job.
Well, so, I mean...
Resham.
Yeah, I'd love to come in on that because, for me, I haven't had a chance to watch it. I managed to get about 20 minutes after work, and I listened to some of your show, and Twitter gave me some
You're fully informed,
great
then.
feed. Yes, I know everything I need to know, Ian. I listen to you. But my view is, there was a poll last year that showed that 82% of people believe that politicians don't care what people think, and 62% think that politics is designed for the rich and famous. And if we want to have a democracy that functions and that is healthy, we need to have a political and parliamentary system whereby people feel that there are rules for everybody and that if there is an issue or a suspected breach, that there will be formal processes that will be followed. And so my view is less as to what the outcome of the committee is, but that the general public believes that all of their politicians will be held to account for what they have or haven't done. And so I can't comment on the performance today. Like I said, I didn't watch enough of it to think that's a fair judgment to give. But in answer to Scott's question, who's been waiting very patiently, I think it's a fascinating question because, you mentioned earlier that people either, if you loved Boris before, you probably still love him after that. If you hated him before, you probably still hate him. And actually, I think the reality is, whether you love him or hate him, I don't think we'll ever see a political figure like him again.
But do you think he could come back in some shape or form?
Well, it depends what the committee recommends, and it depends how that free vote goes. And I would hate to predict that because I'd probably be wrong no matter what I predicted, because politics over the last decade has shown that you cannot predict anything. But I'd say everything is possible, and it depends on, I guess, what the Privileges Committee finds and what the good people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip decide after that.
Scott, thank you for that question. Let's bring in Sel, who's in St John's Wood, who's got a slightly allied... Seth, who's got a slightly allied question. Seth, hi, what would you like to say?
Hello, Ian. My question is that Keir Starmer took the bull by the horns and removed the whip from Jeremy Corbyn. So why can Rishi Sunak not show similar gumption and remove the Tory whip from Boris Johnson?
You think he should do that before the committee even issues its verdict?
I think so. I mean, enough is enough. It's been an accumulation of so many things going on. And then finally, this afternoon, he goes against the Northern Ireland protocol, which in the circumstances is the best solution that Rishi Sunak could have probably come up with.
He wasn't alone in that. Liz Truss also voted against it, as did Ian Duncan-Smith and Jacob Rees-Mogg and another 18 Tory MPs. I don't think you could remove the whip from someone just because they vote against their government. I mean, that way would lie madness. And I personally would say that I accept that if he is found guilty and is suspended by Parliament, there could well be an argument. But Bob Seeley, I don't know if you've decided how you would vote if there is a vote and he's found guilty. How would you vote in the Commons on that? And do you think that a whip should be removed if he's found guilty?
I will read what the judgment of the report is very carefully. I'm a little bit concerned that Harriet Harman seems to have made up her mind beforehand, according to her tweets. I will probably take the advice of the committee, and I've got form in this because when the party put a three-line whip on Owen Paterson, at first I said yes because I hadn't, thought I could try to be loyal, and then when I read what the issue was, I thought, no, I'm not voting for this, and so I didn't. I was careful not to vote the wrong way on that issue, and this is for me. Seth is right. It's a matter of judgment and standards, and if Boris has done the wrong thing. And I don't quite understand how you can prove somebody knew they were lying, because effectively you have to say, I don't believe you and we think you're a liar anyway. So I think that is a difficult thing to prove. But if they can make the case coherently that Boris had evidence that he was fibbing and that he then fibbed to the House, then, quite significant, that's a serious issue. So I would probably do what the committee suggests. But as we don't know what they're going to suggest, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I haven't read their suggestions, because they haven't yet published their report.
It's been pointed out to me that Boris Johnson, of course, did remove the whip from 21 Conservative MPs over the vote to delay Brexit. But if my recollection is right, that was treated as a confidence vote as well, which the Northern Ireland Protocol vote wasn't.
That was extraordinarily rare. Look, I don't particularly want to go down a route where you lose the whip because you've got votes of conscience. I vote against the government occasionally. I try to be loyal. I'm incredibly supportive of Rishi, because I think he's doing a great job, and I think he's going to carry on doing a great job.
Particularly for the Isle of Wight, obviously.
Well, particularly for the
Resham.
Yeah.
Well, it is wonderful. Go visit. So, Seth, I think that's a great question. I would say no, personally, is my view, because I think until a formal procedure has been completed, we should not overreact. And I think removing the whip would be would give the idea that the Prime Minister was suggesting that Boris Johnson was guilty. And I think it's right to allow that formal process to continue, and then to see. I like that you said took the bull by the horns, because as far as I remember, it was a very slow taking of the bull by the horns, and it was very clear anti-Semitism. In terms of removing the whip in general, as Bob says, I think MPs should have the right to vote as per what they believe is best for their constituents. Otherwise, again, you undermine democracy. So I'm very keen to not see us move to a situation where we start to see whips being removed on matters where people should have the right to represent their constituents.
Okay, Aid?
Broadly, I agree. The only thing that troubles me slightly is, wasn't there a situation a couple of weeks ago where the deal in Northern Ireland was about to come to fruition, and there were reports that Boris Johnson had flown over there and he was trying to coordinate a mutiny? I don't know how much substance there was to that.
I think that's right, but
I didn't hear of that. But I mean, look, there's issues of confidence vote and there's normal votes. He has the right to behave as a parliamentarian, and if you're effectively going to start censoring people who you disagree with, that is a very slippery, rocky road to go down. So actually, I would encourage MPs to have the freedom to vote for their party or against it without censure, unless it's a vote of confidence, which are very rare and which are very specific in the sense they can lead to a general election.
Jim McMahon.
Well, I think that principled position of a Member of Parliament is there to represent their constituents first and foremost. And of course, we take our lead from our parties, and generally as a collection, you take that collective responsibility. This wasn't a vote of confidence in the way that previous votes were, and so it shouldn't be turned into one after the fact. In my view, and I'd say that whoever was the leader, whichever the party was, because I think you've got to have that kind of framework in place in politics. That said, my view is that this is a better deal than the one that Boris Johnson secured, which is why I supported it today.
Fine.
And Boris Johnson
going to Seth's question, though, Starmer removed the whip from Corbyn.
Eventually.
So Seth says, why can't Sunak show similar gumption and remove the whip from Boris Johnson?
I suspect if Rishi Sunak thought he could get away with it, he probably would do. But listen, that's a matter for the Conservative Party, not for me. What I'm interested in, and by the way, I really take exception to the idea that Harriet Harman, as the chair of the Privileges Committee, can have her integrity questioned on this.
She said
the question is not.
The
question is not whether Boris Johnson attended parties that broke the rules, because the Met Police have investigated and they've concluded that. The question being investigated now, today, was whether or not Boris Johnson misled the House of Commons when he said that all the rules and guidance was followed. That's a question being examined, and that's a question that Boris Johnson was given evidence to today. And let's wait and see what the outcome of that is. But let's not allow this kind of descending where we allow...
I think she should wait and see and not actually give her opinions on Twitter way before she's actually led the inquiry.
We can't allow this culture to take place where everyone's as bad as each other, where everyone's in the gutter, because it leads exactly to the trust in politics question that was raised, where people do not trust politicians because we allow this image to be created that we're all in it for ourselves, that we're all trying to get the greasy pole, that we're all kind of fighting like cats in a sack. And that isn't the case. The vast majority of MPs that I see, beyond political parties, act in the interest of their constituents and are there for the right reasons. So let's not get into the gutter by trying to say that the worst behaviour of some reflects all of us.
We will move on to a different subject in just a couple of minutes' time. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
We have with us Jim McMahon, Shadow Environment Secretary, Labour MP for Oldham West and Royton, the Isle of Wight Conservative MP Bob Seeley, Iain Thompson, satirist and podcaster, and Resham Kotecha, Commissioner for the Social Mobility Commission. I guess that does what it says on the tin.
Yes.
But, I mean, what do you actually do as a commissioner?
That's a great question. So it's a statutory independent body that sits within the Cabinet Office. So the Commission itself is staffed by very hardworking, fantastic civil servants.
No partying in the Cabinet Office then?
Absolutely no partying, and none that I've been invited to, no cake either. But it's what's known as a public appointment. So there's a group of us commissioners who went through a quite rigorous application process, wanting to commit to holding the government to account on social mobility. And what that means, I know the term's bandied around a lot, is how can we make sure that the circumstances of your birth, who you're born to, where in the country you're born, what your parents do, what their education level is, that none of that impacts your ability to achieve the best life you can. So increasing that potential, and obviously there's a lot of challenges, geographical challenges, racial challenges, financial challenges. So it's about how can we support and push, be friendly critics to the government and support the ecosystem in the country to make sure that we improve social mobility for everyone.
OK, let's go to our next question. It's from Jen in Poole. It's a text question. It's been said today that sorting out the sewage in the rivers will end up costing us all lots of money. Shouldn't the water companies foot the bill? Well, I think we have to come to the Shadow Environment Secretary first on that one, don't we?
Well, I mean, this was precisely the reason why today is World Water Day, where we should be enjoying our water. Well, everyone knows now. We should be celebrating water, whether it's our coastline, our lakes, our rivers and our streams, because they are so important to us as an island nation. But we aren't able to do that because since 2016, 9 million hours of raw human sewage has been pumped into our coastlines, our lakes and our rivers. And that's because, frankly, there's a failure from top to bottom, whether it's government, the regulators or the water companies themselves. And it is correct that there is no free money. The money that goes into the water industry comes from water bill payers. But it's a matter of fact that over £50 billion has been taken in shareholder dividends that could have been used to pay for vital infrastructure investment.
So this is from a group of peers. They've said in a report that stopping the dumping of sewage will trigger a big spending increase in infrastructure and probably mean consumers have higher bills. Well, either it's consumers are paying at that end of it, or government is paying, but taxpayers are still going to have to fund it, or it comes from borrowing. What would Labour's policy be? Because if you're so horrified about the amount of sewage that's being dumped in rivers, I mean, rightly so, what do you then do about it that this government isn't doing?
But we believe that the vast majority of sewage discharges that are taking place now can be avoided just by better routine management rather than those kind of big capital concrete projects.
So why aren't the water companies doing that then?
Frankly, because it's almost been deregulated. The permitting scheme now is far more generous than it ever was. That means it's cheaper for the water companies to dump it into the open spaces. And I should say, like we imagine the rivers. My nearest discharge point is a football playing field. So literally, kids are playing football on this piece of grass, thinking it's a football playing field. What it is. But the water company considers it as a discharge point, so not even when the storms come, but that's just where that raw human sewage goes. It's absolutely disgusting. So it will require investment, but the government now, in May next year, will have to have the price review report as a draft. And so they're going to have to make a call about, well, how do they kind of team and ladle investment versus dividend payments? And my view is less on the dividends, more on investment.
But how do you achieve that?
Well, the regulator has the power now, which is the frustrating part of this. We have Ofwat as the financial regulator and the Environment Agency as the environmental regulator, who frankly seem to be squabbling with each other rather than working together to get a single plan to fix the water industry. And we think that's part of the problem. But also, frankly, the fines now are so minuscule in the overall scheme of their running costs. They're baked in as like a side expense rather than a core expense that will hit their bottom line. So there is no incentive for the water companies to really tackle this in the way they ought to.
OK, Aidan Thompson.
I think it's, I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle and say I'm a big fan of pumping sewage into the waterways, into lakes.
Brave.
Ponds.
Quite a niche position.
Yeah, it's my USP.
Just you.
Yeah.
We can go visit this football field.
Yeah, look, I'm just saying, like, it works for me. Like, if I really need to go, I just find the nearest place. No, I think it could be a good look. Like, in the UK at the moment, we're slowly watching a sort of tanking of living standards, and we hear a lot about people glamorising the good old days. I read a piece in the Telegraph a few months ago where they said about the cost of energy, electricity, and it wouldn't do Generation Z and millennials any harm to go without heating and energy. Could be just what's required to kick us whippersnappers into...
Toughen people up a bit.
Absolutely. And I think, a big part of that should be allowing London to descend into a Victorian sewage nightmare where everyone just lets it all sort of come out. Maybe we could get some good new diseases going.
I think you should
emerge from labs.
I think you should declare your interest as a government advisor at this point.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say they can't be bought, and it's about returning...
It's him that's supposed to be the satirist, not you, Jim.
I know. It's too close to reality. That's a problem.
Resham.
I mean, I'm a millennial. I think I'm plenty tough enough. I've got to be honest, I haven't looked in depth at the regulation. So I'm very happy to be steered by a solution that means that we can play on fields without poo on them. What that solution is, I'm open to ideas. And if it is more investment, I mean, as a taxpayer, I would be happy to pay more for clean water and kind of a clean Britain if also that investment was being matched by the companies, because obviously I don't want my money going to pay greater dividends when there is sewage leaking.
But Bob Seeley, this was the whole point of water privatisation, wasn't it? Because the public sector wasn't capable of providing the investment, so the theory was that the private sector would do it. And maybe in the first 20 years that did happen. Yep. But at the moment, it is indefensible, isn't it? The increase in the amount of sewage that's being dumped into rivers, lakes, wherever.
For sure, but actually what I'm hearing is actually almost the direct opposite of the truth. So let's get some facts out there. We passed the Environment Act last year.
Oh, truth matters at this point. It didn't matter 5 minutes ago.
Well, can I answer? Okay, let me start with some facts here, which you opposed. The Environment Act, groundbreaking act to clean up and mandate significant targets to improve our environment across the board. You're shaking your head. You obviously didn't read the bill you voted against, so let me explain.
It's literally my job to read the bill. It's literally what I do.
The Environment
I don't need to be taught on what the Environment Bill is. It just doesn't go far enough.
Fight. Okay.
The Environment Act mandated
That's not what this
groundbreaking. The Environment Act mandated groundbreaking changes in the way we look after our environment. It was a significant piece of legislation. Within that, there is a special element on how we deal with sewage. Now, I'll take the Isle of Wight because it's something I know about, and I'm also a sea swimmer, and I swim in Newtown Creek and Freshwater Bay. So actually, I care about the quality of seawater as much as anyone here, if not more, because I don't want to be swallowing poo either, frankly. We have a national best practice scheme which is going to be paving the way for the sort of changes that are going to be happening in the next 5 to 10 years throughout the environmental system, throughout the sewage system in this country. We have tens of millions of pounds of investment going into the Isle of Wight alone. There will be billions across the country. And when Jim says, they take fines into account, £95 million fine for Southern Water for discharge into Kent and Sussex? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. These water companies are now investing billions more. And what I want to do, rather than just attack them, I want to see them investing in places like my constituency, like the island. And I can run through exactly what they're doing. 25 million into Sandown Sewage Works, 7 million into Cowes, Newport and Brading, 5 million into Carisbrooke. We have £1 million into Ventnor Waterworks and £500,000 for a bunch of other places. Yeah. On top of that, we have a water butt scheme, a slow release water butt scheme. Titty you not, Frankie Howard might have said back in the 1970s, but I'm showing my age,
not titty,
like you.
I promise.
We have a slow release water butt scheme. So in a place like Gurnard, which is on the coast where people swim, including myself, you have people are being offered slow release water butts. So that means when it rains, the water doesn't go straight into the sewage.
Jim would counter that and say £50 billion of dividends to shareholders. 50. Over what period is that?
Well, since privatisation.
Well, that's quite a long period.
That's a huge amount of time. Do you want to be more precise?
A lot of that is backloaded. We've seen a significant amount.
And the companies are borrowing billions. Yes, they make money, but they make money so they are healthy companies, so they borrow billions more. And actually, if they were nationalised, you wouldn't be. The problem is the nationalised water industry didn't invest anything like the private ones. Am I happy with where the privatised industries are now? No, they're nowhere near good enough, but they are still twice as much as the government invested
Jim
years
has a
ago.
question for you.
I think Bob's having an argument with himself. I've never suggested privatising water, and this is the reason why. Nationalising water.
Is that a policy? You're going to change your mind next week?
And the reason for that, I am sick and tired of privatising profit and nationalising risk. For the water companies that are taking billions of pounds out of the system, they're going to be made to invest in the future.
They've been made to invest last year under the Environment Act, and we did it, not you. You voted against this groundbreaking act that we brought in
to clear up
the rivers, to clear up the beaches.
Let me ask you one question then, see if you disagree with our plan. Instead of lengthy, costly investigations by the Environment Agency to deliver those fines, do you agree with our plan to have automatic fines the second sewage is discharged?
I don't know the detail of your plan. If you want to send it to me, I'll read it. I'm not going to give you an answer off the hook. I haven't read what I'm being asked to read.
It's been very entertaining, but we are over time for our news break, so let's go to that now. It's 8:32. Charlotte Morgan has the news headlines.
Boris Johnson has insisted drinks events at Downing Street during the pandemic were essential as he tried to convince MPs he did not mislead Parliament about the Partygate scandal. If a committee of MPs believe he did, then the former Prime Minister could be suspended as an MP or be forced to face a by-election. A suspect who's being questioned after a man was set on fire in Birmingham on Monday has been arrested in connection with a similar attack in West London. The victim of the assault earlier this week remains in hospital with burns to his face. And next week's rail strikes have been called off. The RMT union says they're being suspended after a breakthrough in fresh discussions with train operators. LBC weather, heavy showers spreading northeastwards overnight with a low of 2 Celsius.
This is LBC.
Quite a sparky one tonight, isn't it? Because our panel consists of Aidan Thompson, satirist and podcaster. Now, you host this podcast called Aidan Thompson and Other Disappointments. You had me on as a guest a few weeks ago. Was I a disappointment?
I'm delighted to say you lived up to the name of the podcast. No, you were wonderful, Ian. Thank you very much for coming on. Yes.
So just tell us exactly what the podcast is all about.
Yeah, so it's a sort of satirical look at the week's news through the prism of dystopia. I do one solo show where I sort of rant and ridicule the headlines from that day, and then I do a guested one on the Friday night. Usually myself and the guest will enjoy a beer or a glass of wine together and try and make sense of the senseless.
Didn't offer me that.
No, well, you said that
mainly
you'd been up
because I was
since...
on Zoom. But
You'd been awake since like 4 a.m. or something.
Had I?
And...
Oh, yeah, I think that was that day I came back from America. Anyway,
yes,
you can find your podcast on all the main platforms?
Yes.
Good. Resham Kotecha is here with us as well as Bob Seeley, Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, and Jim McMahon, Labour Shadow Environment Secretary. Right, next question comes from John in Redbridge. John, what would you like to ask? Oh, no, it's a text question. Bad presenter. The question is, the train strikes are off. Did the unions win? Resham.
I've done a lot of negotiation courses, and I think the answer I'd give on that is a good negotiation is one where everyone walks away feeling that no one quite won and no one quite lost. I mean, the strikes are off, they're in negotiations. I fully respect people's right to strike. As a train user, it's been challenging to say the least, and I do think there are struggles for people in a cost of living crisis with very high inflation who are now struggling to get to work and suffering because of that. So as a user, it's challenging and frustrating. I hope a deal is reached. I know some unions have accepted and some have not.
Well, just on that, the planned strikes by the RMT with the train operators scheduled for next Thursday and Saturday have now been called off. That's been announced this evening, so the union can negotiate with the train operating representatives. So it seems as though the RMT have settled with Network Rail. It looks as if a deal might be in the offing here as well. But who do you feel has won? You've sat on the fence so far.
Well, I think the easy answer is the commuters have lost in the short term.
It's not the question. You're being a politician.
I get to answer the question I want to, Ian. I thought that was the rule on the show.
Well, it depends if you want to come back. Jim?
Well, I think, train-going passengers have won because they're going to get the service back. But we need to be really clear on this, that the way that the strikes have been drawn out by a government who, for quite a long time, refused to even negotiate, has cost the taxpayer more than had the settlement have taken place earlier. There are huge issues with our train system and the way it's been downgraded. And I would say this, the government, of course, need to resolve the strikes, but they also need to make sure that the regular service works in the way that it should do. And frankly, I was astonished to see Avanti West Coast Mainland line's contract extended when the service is routinely
Can I say, on Monday, I spent 5.5 hours on the West Coast Main Line travelling to Glasgow, and the same Tuesday coming back. It was fabulous.
Well, I would say, because I get that train every week, as you'd expect, back and forward from Manchester Piccadilly to Euston, that it is hugely unreliable. It's often overcrowded. And it's the staff I feel sorry for, because they're at the front end of that kind of passenger frustration where people are really at the end of their tether. And I see staff who work really hard, long hours, to provide that service, and they feel frustrated with the way things are. I would also say this. What I hear a lot in this language is an attack on what I see decent working class jobs to be, except your lot. Almost like setting one worker against the other in a way that I think is really, really unhealthy in this debate. These are good jobs. They, of course, have good terms and conditions. Part of that is being in a trade union. And the workers collectively decided to take that action because they weren't happy with the settlement, because they are facing the cost of living crisis in the way that we all are. They have to make ends meet. I'm glad a settlement's been reached. That's good news for the workers.
They're
talking. Been cancelled, and hopefully we'll find a final settlement that's good for workers, good for passengers, and gets things moving once again.
But what the government's offered the RMT. What would you be offering them?
Well, it's not for Labour to negotiate in opposition. We're not around that table. What we can do is to offer common sense, which is, well, the first really negotiation is to get round the table And, to give credit to the current Transport Secretary, he is at least doing that in a way that his predecessor didn't. But what we need to do is to, in the way that's been said already, so part of this is that everyone has to give, everyone has to compromise and to reach a solution that's right for all parties.
A lot of my listeners are getting rather fed up with Labour representatives coming on this programme and not being able to say what their policy would be, whichever strike it is. I mean, the NHS, where the nurses wanted 19%, clearly they were never going to get 19%. But I think people have a right to ask you, under a Labour government, how would things be different? Would you automatically offer 2 or 3% more than the Conservatives do?
Well, I mean, I don't want to break the illusion of what Labour is in opposition versus what a government is, and I know you understand this, Ian, but it's worth saying for the listening public. In opposition, the department that I shadow has over 10,000 members of staff, and I have 2. The idea that on every policy and every issue we can match policy for policy, for position for position, is frankly for the birds. We are not the government. We are not even the shadow government in respect of trade union negotiations and workplace negotiations. We are the opposition holding the government to account to govern in the public interest, and that's what we're doing.
You only have 2 members of staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to be arguing for a bit more short money.
Well, I mean, if Bob wants to go back and make that case on a cross-party
obviously Rachel
basis...
Reeves is creaming it all off and getting...
I'm happy to make that case, because I wish you would hold the government to account. I wish you would be a decent opposition. When you don't be a decent opposition, you might be ready for...
Anyway, all right, let's look at... No, let's get the answer from Bob on the question from John.
From the sewage debate.
The train strikes are off. Did the unions win, Bob?
Sorry?
Did the unions win?
Well, we don't know, because it depends what the result is. But I think the unions probably have lost because they've tried striking, tried intimidating the government.
Oh, come on.
I mean, come on. This is the RMT. This is a union that ballots for strike action before it's even negotiating. The fact is that you are incredibly weak on the unions because they're your biggest paymaster. And time again, you excuse...
The RMT don't get any money from Labour. Sorry, the other way around.
Well, no, but the RMT and other unions support individuals as well as collectively. So whether they give collectively money to the centre, they give money to Labour MPs. But the union movement as a whole, time and time again, you're soft on because they're your paymasters.
Because they are working people.
So does that...
The trade union movement is a collection of working people
that
come together to negotiate.
Does that mean then, Bob, that you kowtow to the business community who are your funders?
Well,
I mean, that's the logic
not
of your
according to Boris Johnson, because I think he said some quite tasty things about business at various points. But, OK, when you're talking about union members, I think what pains a lot of people and what grips a lot of people who use the railways is that train drivers on 70, 80, 90,000 pounds...
How dare a working class person earn a decent living? Can I
finish a sentence? Can I finish a sentence? I have
it's
the courtesy,
insulting, frankly.
Jim, I have the courtesy...
Absolutely insulting.
I have the courtesy to listen to you. Please...
Oh, come on, you've done your fair share of interrupting, Bob.
Have I? Fair enough.
Yes, you have, really.
Fair enough. OK, let me finish the sentence
I like the though, it's nice.
I do. OK, what grips me and a lot of other people is that you have people on 70, 80, 90 grand a year preventing people on 20, 30 and 40 grand a year from getting to work. And maybe if these people were a bit more union-minded, supporting each other, they would have respect. They would have respect. They would have respect for people trying to get to work.
On the train
you get on the tube in the mornings. You get on the tube in the mornings on the Victoria line, and these aren't bankers getting into work. They're cleaners of hospitals.
Nobody wants a strike.
And
nobody wants
union bosses at the RMT. Untrue. Union bosses at the RMTU because they ballot for strikes before they negotiate.
It's ASLEF who are train drivers. There are a few RMT, but it's mainly ASLEF. Right, Aid, you've been watching this develop. What would you like to say?
I was going to say, all right, guys, come on, we've all had a few drinks.
I haven't. I wish I had.
Yeah, I might need one after this.
No, I don't know. I think it's interesting. So I guess the answer to the question, like who's won and who's lost, I've lost because I was actually really enjoying working from home. And now I'm going to have to jump back on a train next Thursday. I was enjoying doing the school run with my son. I think the subject of shipping people in on 20 grand, 25 grand, and then them stumbling and not being able to make it into work because the train service employee is striking that might be on more money than them, and the public then clapping back on that and not being supportive of that. That to me seems a bit disjointed with the polling that I've seen. I think the general public have broadly been behind the workers, behind the
Well, it depends
strikers.
which workers you're talking.
I'm not sure I buy that.
The polls have not said that about the train strikes.
Well,
they have about the
actually.
NHS work.
No, they have said that about the train strikes. And anecdotally, I can tell you that whenever I do a phone-in on the train strikes, this is different from years ago. The overwhelming number of people who phone in are supporting the unions on this, which wouldn't have been the case 5 years ago. So I think that there has been a bit of a shift.
Ian, are you saying that is representative? Because
I said it was anecdotal.
For me, I don't think it is. I think people are fed up. I mean, look, times are tough. We know that.
The opinion polls do back that up.
You shouldn't strike. I'm delighted that nurses on the Isle of Wight chose not to strike because they actually chose, God bless them, to look after patients first. I know times are tough. We all know times are tough. But the way to do it, the way to get through this is to make sure we keep inflation down so actually pay rises can mean something in future, not having huge pay rises when we have high inflation, which is only going to beggar us in the years to come. And what the government is doing is trying to think of the whole collectively and not being like the Labour Party, which is encouraging this strike.
All right. Well, Gina is loving the show. She says, loving it. Best show ever. Thanks, Ian.
Am I being a bit ranty?
You are being a little bit ranty.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's definitely your fault.
But
I blame the guests.
As Corey just said in my we love it. Right, we're going to take more of your calls in a moment. It's 8:46.
This is LBC.
Now, our two debutants on the panel have really got into the groove of this programme in not fighting with each other, giving very concise answers. Yet the two politicians are being are a bit on the naughty step, particularly you, Bob, if I may say so. But it's entertaining anyway. Right, let's go to our next question. It is from Chuck in Cardiff. Chuck, hello. What would you like to ask?
Hello, good evening, panel. Now that the Chinese president just left Russia after a 3-day visit, their relationship is undoubtedly getting stronger and stronger. If China begins to supply weapons to Russia to fight Ukraine, how is the West going to respond or react?
Or how should we react? Aidan Thompson.
Oh, that's a big question.
Aren't you so glad you're
We have all the big questions on this programme.
Yeah.
We expect big answers too.
Oh, well, no pressure then. I'll try not to be a disappointment. So, I don't know. I mean, It feels to me like we're sort of backed into a corner with Ukraine at the moment. So, to my mind, the whole thing started with a scarcity of natural resources. It seems quite clear to me that Putin invaded Ukraine because Ukraine is a relative sort of sweetie shop of natural gas, of various other materials. In pulling the rug out from Putin, we then forced him to, like with natural gas sales, we then forced him to go and then build relationships elsewhere, and that has now transpired. We now need to find a way of responding to that, well, firstly commercially with regards to natural resources, but also now militarily. I'm not sure what the answer is to that, really. Realignment with the EU? To build up strength, build bridges with North America.
I think to be fair, the Western response through NATO, and you can include the EU in that, has been, I don't think it could have been more united than it has been, really, could it? I mean, I think the problem is actually the rest of the world, and a lot of the rest of the world doesn't see it in the way that we do.
Yeah.
And Putin has been able to take some succour from that. Bob Seeley.
Sorry, just in a couple of points. And we are aligning with the EU pretty closely with North America. And Ukraine is not a natural gas or natural... It's not a raw material source for Russia, because Russia has massive reserves of natural gas and oil and other things. Look, I think it's really dangerous. And I think some people are drawing comparisons with the 1930s, that we have a series of sort of regional crises that could yet align into a global crisis. So you have China threatening Taiwan. You have China's ally Russia invading Ukraine. And we have Russia's ally Iran potentially threatening to develop a nuclear device. So we are potentially quite close to a very unpleasant realignment of the world, according to authoritarian powers who will be challenging sort of democracies in the Middle East, or Western allies stroke democracies in the Middle East, in the Pacific, in Taiwan, and in Ukraine. What do we do about it? Well, we remind the Chinese that actually it's their interest to have a global order in which they're doing incredibly well out of. That's the first point. Secondly, that there should be consequences if they give weapons to the Russians, because the Russians are arming the Ukrainians. Sorry, are using that in Ukraine to kill Ukrainians, and to actually do disgusting things like stealing tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. That was just utterly vile. And thirdly, is we challenge what this new alliance, this depressing alliance of authoritarian powers are doing in the developing parts of the world. So it is a dangerous situation. We should hold our nerve. The least bad option, despite all the nuclear rhetoric from Putin, the least bad option is that we continue to arm the Ukrainians so they can defend their country, and there is a chance of them winning the war this year. Because every month that this war goes on, it will become more and more dangerous. And if it goes on for the next 2 to 3 years, I wouldn't like to think of some of the possibilities that could happen.
Jim?
Well, I agree with Bob quite usually. After all the first half of the show, we find a point of agreement, because in the end, the position with the UK, with our European allies, is one of absolute unity when it comes to supporting the people of Ukraine defend their sovereignty. In a sense, the visit was only a reflection of that troubling kind of alignment of those two authoritarian regimes, and of course that is a concern. We haven't yet seen, I don't think, the step to provide weapons. I think China will look very closely at what that means for its economic circumstance. Of course, the West is a significant trading partner of China, but we need to approach that relationship absolutely clear-eyed. It's not one relationship without risk.
Resham?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think it's a very dangerous time for us. We need to be really clear about the risk that China poses to the geopolitical order. I think it is really important to be aware that, this might be very clear to us in the West and in NATO, but parts of the world do view it differently. I think supporting the Ukrainian people with everything they could want and need to win this war is the best course of action, and the quicker the resolution, the better, not just for the sake of the very innocent millions and millions of people who are suffering, but for geopolitical order. And I think we should make the case to China and make it very clear that there will be economic sanctions, and it is not in their best interest to arm Russia. And I would assume, given the way the war is going, that they would see that and view that as not a sensible path for them to go to. But we need to hold strong and keep going with our support for Ukraine.
Chuck, thank you very much for the question.
Great question.
Let's move on to a text question from Andrew in Gloucester. Now that Rishi Sunak has published his tax return, should we expect all our other politicians to do the same, Jim McMahon?
Well, how boring would my tax return be?
Well, I don't know, you tell us.
Well, I mean, it's essentially the income I get as a Member of Parliament. And then, like many MPs, I do a collection of surveys during the course of the year that's then donated to local charities and good causes. and that's it. In terms of the principal position, should MPs publish their tax returns, I think, as a general rule, people's tax affairs are private, and providing that people comply with the law of the land, then that should be the case. I do think, though, there is a case for the Prime Minister and potentially the Chancellor for that, and Rishi himself has agreed to that, which is why he's published it. I don't think there's anything at the moment that's too surprising in there. He confirms that he's extremely well off, but we knew that before the tax return was published. It's taken a while to publish it. I think we've been waiting for a number of months for it to come forward, but it's there, and I think it does aid transparency.
Bob?
I mean, if we have to, we have to. I haven't given it much thought. If we have to as part of the job, I'd be happy to do so. Like Jim, my salary is basically, what I get as an MP. So, I mean, I don't. If we have to do it, we have to do it. Do I think we should be doing it? I'm sort of two minds about it. There's an argument for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to do it, and maybe Cabinet Ministers, yeah, for sure.
Resham?
I'd ask to what purpose and to what end. I mean, if it's just so that we can kind of have a gawk at which MPs are rich and which are less rich, I don't really see why there's a need to invade private life. If it builds transparency and trust in our democratic system, I do believe politicians themselves do have a right to a private life, but perhaps there's an argument to have a review by an independent body, IPSA, or someone else to review that tax affairs are in order, which I would assume and hope that they are. I would be in support of very clear declarations. I know you have to declare interests, but there should be the ability to hold MPs to account if they misdeclare or do not declare side interests in the appropriate time, and I think that could be a bit stricter.
Aid?
I agree with Bob. I think for cabinet ministers, people, like, as they move further up the chain and they gain more power and influence, and they're more susceptible to being bought, putting it very boldly, I'd be really interested to see what goes on in their financial affairs.
We'd all be interested, but the point is, I mean, is that enough? Just because we want to see what they will earn?
I'd be interested in Gary Lineker's tax affairs right now.
Oh, come on. Come on.
You see, you were doing so well.
Just can't help himself.
It's a joke, Jim. It's not a joke. Remember,
right.
we had them once.
We've got a couple of minutes left. A text question from Simon in Cardiff. Will you shed a tear for Donald Trump if he's arrested in the next few days? Resham?
No, is my easy answer. I wouldn't. I mean, again, as I've said repeatedly, I think democracy is important. A politician should be held to account. If he's arrested, that's because there are believed to be charges against him, and then he should serve justice the way all of the citizens of the United States would in similar circumstances.
If Boris Johnson's had his hearing today and then Donald Trump gets arrested within the same week or the next 10 days, I am going to have myself a little party.
And what if Nicola Sturgeon is visited by the police because she's under investigation as well?
Well, if it turns out that she's corrupt as well, yeah, sure. More the merrier. Crack open a champers.
I wish to disassociate myself from that remark. Bob?
No.
You wouldn't shed a tear? No. And I'm sure you wouldn't either, Jim.
I wouldn't shed a tear, but I wouldn't take any joy from it either. I think it's, for any world leader, which he was, to be in that position is a disgrace and quite a dark day for democracy, really. I mean, in a way, you could argue the system's worked if that is the outcome of a proper investigation, but I don't think anyone should take joy in it. It's a fairly depressing position for him to find himself in.
Okay, now, a final fun text question. How many of you are fans of Culture Club?
Do you mean talking about the old band?
Yeah.
Well, as
because,
in Boy George?
Yeah, Nina in Sunderland has got a question on this. The drummer from Culture Club is getting £1.75 million from the rest of the band after they kicked him out. Who from the world of entertainment would you pay to just go away?
I mean, I don't know who they are, but I would take $1.25 million to go away.
You don't know who Culture Club are?
Culture Club, massive.
Boy George?
Yes.
Come a Chameleon?
Come a Chameleon.
Yes. I'm there now.
That's the highlight of this hour, Bob Seeley singing Come a Chameleon.
And what was the other? They did another great song as well. What was it?
Yeah,
and he said, I remember he did a great interview. He said he preferred Cup of Tea to Sex.
That's very true. I prefer Lilt, personally. Aid?
Who would I pay 1.3 million to just go away?
1.75.
I'm sorry, 1.75. Wow. I don't know. Can you come back to me in a minute? There's a lot.
Think on your feet, Aid. Bob?
I was going to say Gary Lineker.
I knew you were going to say that.
I don't need to get the jeers again from Jim. He's been very, very serious.
What are we going to do now if he says, if you're his?
I can see a deal there.
I don't think Bob is from the world of entertainment, though after this hour, who knows? Jim?
I'm just so tight with money. I just couldn't imagine spending that amount of money.
Well, it's not yours, so it's okay.
Oh, like imaginary money. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't dislike anybody that much.
See, me.
Yeah, but so you've got to get your game theory hat on. I'd be like, Ian, would you split it if I said you?
Oh God, right. I never survived politics.
I'm not even saying 50-50.
You would never be invited back on the programme again, obviously. Right, listen, we have to bring this shenanigans to an end. Aid, Resham, Jim and Bob, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. Now, in the next hour, a West Midlands school has been criticised for failing to teach controversial issues in a way that's safe for everyone after a gay Muslim speaker was challenged by students and later received death threats on social media. An external report on Wood Green Academy in Wednesbury was commissioned after the incident in November last year, in which students questioned the speaker on his views about homosexuality and Islam. So I want your views on that, but I also want to ask this question.